Come to the Nor'Wester Brew Pub about 5:30 p.m. on June 25th for the program, and if you'd like some more information, call Nancy Martin at the club. We've all been reading about how volunteerism, the heart of American society, is in decline in recent years. Next week, we will focus on this critical phenomena with a program entitled Volunteers, Debit or Credit. The program will feature Bob McMiniman, an attorney and past City Club president, John Emmerich, CEO of Norm Thompson, and Jill Nichols, executive director of the Oregon Trail chapter of the American Red Cross. The place is the Benson Hotel, Mayfair Room, and please note that that's a change in location. Research volunteers are still needed for our series of approximately 6 ballot measure studies to be undertaken this year. The committees must be set up within the next 2 weeks, and if you're interested in serving, please contact the research director, Paul Leisner, today. Call the club office. Our board host, seated at the head table today, is Greg Jackson, member of the Board of Governors and Public Relations Director for the Metropolitan Group, also chair of the program committee and responsible for organizing today's Friday Surprise and eating hesitantly because he will be putting the one for August together as well. Following Greg's first question to the panel, we will take questions from club members in the audience, and if you have a question, please line up behind the microphone right while Greg's speaking and ask your question in 30 seconds. The City Club's primary theme, rebuilding community, could not have a more stellar focus than Bill Naito. Bill's recent death has left a void in Portland that even a parkway named for him would be unable to fill. I've lived in Bill's neighborhood for 28 years. Though I stood in awe of his accomplishments, I stood in terror of his meandering geese. A truly bigger-than-life citizen, the image I will always cherish of Bill is his role as a firefly in a Riverdale school pageant, complete with tail light. He was a complete human being who delighted in life. Don Barney will lead our distinguished panel in discussing what would this region be like if there were a little bit of Bill Naito in each of us. Don is an ex-City Club president with wide experience in journalism and in public service. He's a private consultant now, serving as president of Barney & Worth. Thank you for leading us today, Don.
I want to introduce to you those that are going to share with us today the persona and spirit of Bill Naito. To the far end next to Greg is Jackie Babicky. She's the president of Babicky Consulting and is a former chair of the Portland Chamber of Commerce. And it's in that capacity that she worked closely with Bill, who was a member of the Chamber Board for about 20 years. She and Bill worked together on many projects. As she said when she was chair, she wanted to have Bill on her executive committee at her side to keep her and the rest of the board honest. She's a board member also for the First Interstate Development Corporation and a founding member of the Oregon Enterprise Forum. She also is a regular contributor to the Business Journal and the Daily Journal of Commerce newspapers. To Jackie's left is Paul Bragdon, president of the Oregon Graduate Institute of Science and Technology. He's also president of the Multnomah County Library Foundation and a member of the County Library Advisory Board. It's there in these capacities with the library that Paul was a colleague of Bill's when Bill was chair, as he was, of the library board until his death. As many of us know, Paul Bragdon served as president of Reed College for 17 years until 1988 and as educator advisor to former Governor Neil Goldschmidt in Salem. He was also president in the early 90s of the Medical Research Foundation before taking over the helm at OGI. To Paul's left is Lisa Naito, Bill's daughter-in-law. Lisa is representative of Southeast Portland at the state legislature and is completing her third term. More recently, she is now elected as a Metro councilor and will be assuming that office. At Salem, she promoted legislation on children and public education. A native of Oregonian, Lisa holds a law degree from the University of Oregon Law School and is a former deputy district attorney from Multnomah County. She and her husband Steve have 2 children and live in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood. To Lisa's left is Henry Sakamoto. He brings to the panel today yet another personal connection to Bill Naito. As in Bill's history, Henry was one of 120,000 resident Japanese and Japanese Americans who were moved by the U.S. government during World War II from their homes to detention centers across the country. As Bill also did, Henry served in the U.S. Army during the war. Henry will be telling us of 2 projects on which he worked closely with Bill in recent years. A native Oregonian also, he's president of Oregon Nikkei Endowment and a consultant to the wheat industry and is looking forward to retirement in the near future. We'll ask each of our panelists to come to the podium and for a few minutes share their remembrances and anecdotes about Bill. And after each has finished that round, I think what we'll do is stay at the table and they ask them each to come back to each of them and ask them each to talk a little bit about the spirit of Bill and what this community would be like if there was a little bit of Bill Naito in each of us. And then, as Francis has indicated, there'll be time for questions. Before I turn over to the panel, I have a little reminiscence that I'd just like to share with you. In my rounds of talking to community leaders, as I do from time to time for my clients, I always had Bill Naito on my list. Bill, in my mind, was the essence of community leadership in Portland. But he was also a heck of a lot of fun to interview. I'd go down to his office. There's Bill in the middle of this sea of desks in this large room, talking to me about the great issues for Portland for the day, shuffling through pink message slips, deciding who he was going to be able to call to next, or signing checks that his office manager had put in front of him, and at the same time providing these wonderful insights about the community. At some point in each of those conversations, he'd get very excited and his hands would start waving in the air and he'd get more and more enthusiastic about what he was talking about. I recall discussing with him the eventuality and the potential of what is now the Rose Garden, the arena that the Blazers were going to. And where should that be? A lot of conversation at the beginning, you may recall, was about let's put it out in the suburbs where there'd be parking and so forth. And Bill said, with a wave of a hand, they know where they have to go. They have to go downtown. Put them over there. Put them right next to the Memorial Coliseum. And he was one of the very first people to identify what, of course, has been a very positive solution for the community. But as he went on in this conversation, he started saying, Lewis and Clark, you know, and I couldn't quite follow him, and he was off on this, and I thought, what in the devil is something that happened in 1905 got to do with what we're talking about? And then he burst out in his enthusiasm. It's 2005 we're talking about, Lewis and Clark exhibition. In the year 2005, we need to bring that back. We need to bring back that great vision of Portland for the nation and the world to see. That's the kind of vision that would pop out of Bill Naito in the middle of an enthusiastic conversation that made him such a cherished and important member of our community. And I know that others here today on the panel will want to share those kind of remembrances with you, and I'll ask Jackie if she'll begin for us.
I'm really delighted to be here today. This is quite an honor both to attend and to get an opportunity to tell my remembrances of Bill. Bill and Mickey were peripherally in my life a long time before I knew Bill in the business community, because my parents and Bill and Mickey played bridge quite a bit. In fact, my mom and dad are over here, so my mom is watching what I'm doing. And I got to be good. Anyway, when I then got more involved in the community and particularly got involved in the Portland Chamber, immediately, began to see Bill, and at the chamber meetings, as Don said, he was certainly a member of that board for 20 years, appointed every year, because we couldn't survive without him. We needed him to be there and keep us reminded of the vision and keep us understanding that the business community needed to share in the vision that was held for Portland, and that when there were issues that the business community needed to address, we could be positive that Bill was going to raise his hand during one of the board meetings or in one of the committee meetings and make sure that we knew what that issue was, whether it was education or the library or trees or greenways or parkways or what was happening with Fairless Square, that we should hear about it. And at first, I wasn't really aware of the major part that Bill was playing, but slowly I began to realize that when Bill had an idea, we should listen. Because even though it might sound a little off the wall at first, that it probably was a pretty good idea, and it probably was one that really did fit into a vision of the kind of community I think we're all trying to create. And that was a city, first of all, of caring, and certainly one of beauty, and one of ideas, and one of trees, one of learning, education, and certainly, again, where people were actively involved and committing to creating the future that we want to do together. And also one where we shouldn't get too involved in our own self-importance. I think Bill took a great pleasure in kind of poking at us every once in a while when we got too involved in our own importance in the community. My particular favorite story about Bill is that, as we talked about, I chaired the Chamber of Commerce Board, and the year that I was chair-elect, the chairman missed one of the meetings, and I was asked if I would preside over that particular meeting. And I was pleased to do so, but as you might imagine, kind of nervous. It's a pretty huge boardroom with about 60 people that come to the board meeting, and so I was preparing and ready to go, and up in the front of the room, and just about to lower the gavel to start the meeting, and Bill stood up and said, "I really want you to know that this is a very momentous occasion. We have waited 102 years for a woman to chair this chamber board." And then he looked directly at me and said, "I sure hope it was worth the wait." And to me, that would be very typical of Bill. I mean, he named it what it was and then said, "Okay, we're going to hold your toes to the fire. You're here. We expect you to perform. We expect quality. We expect commitment out of you. And we're paying attention, and we're glad you're here, but we expect you to do the job." And I always kept that in mind, and felt like, that was a standard to which I wanted to perform. And, I think Bill did that to many of us in many ways, and we miss him. Thanks.
Mickey, Sam, members of the family, other friends of Bill Naito. I first met Bill early in my tenure as president of Reed College, when with Gene McCall, the late Gene McCall Babson, a Reed alumna and trustee, I went to see Bill to encourage him to become a member of the Reed College Board of Trustees, his own alma mater. He was generous enough to agree to serve, and served for all of the 17 years I was president and on until the time of his death, and which was a few years after I had become president emeritus. I think that his service as a trustee of Reed is best captured by a member of the Reed faculty who worked with him and other trustees on an educational proposal, and he said to me, "Of all the trustees during that period of discussion and decision, Bill was the most interested, the most patient, and the most receptive to considering ideas for change, even radical ones. I also served with Bill, a little-known chapter perhaps in his career. I also served with Bill on the board of directors of the Portland branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And Bill was quite conspicuous in the deliberations of that board because he was always contending with Fed officials, including Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan, with respect to monetary policy and the discount rate in particular. Now, I can tell you that an argument or a discussion between Volcker and Bill was really something to see. First of all, Paul Volcker was as commanding and as powerful a personality as you could ever hope to meet, and he was the central banker of central bankers for a very critical period in world and American history. But the thing that was really striking is that Paul is 6 feet 8 inches tall. And as was mentioned, I had the pleasure of serving under Bill's chairmanship on the library board for the Multnomah County Library, where, as Ginny Cooper has advised us, Bill showed his concurrent commitment, his passion for the magnificent and the mundane. For it's a fact that the current major renovation and restoration of our central library would not be taking place if it were not for the initiatives, insistence, and leadership of Bill Naito. And let me say, we're going to miss him sorely in our campaign for Central Library as we try to make what is going to be a very good library a great library by adding some private financial support. We're going to miss his leadership. But in any case, the fact that it is happening is largely due to Bill's initiative, his persistence, his insistence, and his leadership. But on the other hand, as Ginny pointed out to me, when the library reopens in grandeur and splendor in March of next year, the fact that the elevator cabs will have mirrors, the women's restrooms will be brightly lighted, and the carpets in the non-public areas will be serviceable, not ornamental. That is strictly Bill Naito. Finally, particularly in recent years, I was Bill's sometimes luncheon companion at luncheons that had no agenda at all, or if there was one, you would not believe that serious-minded persons like us would have those subjects to discuss and to act upon. More about that later.
Thank you. The major influence that Bill has had on my life is obviously through his family. Since I fell in love with Steve Naito and married him, Bill's second son, I'm certainly glad and thankful that Bill met Mickey and they built a family together. Bill said many times that the best thing he ever did in his life was marry Mickey. He was devoted to her, and he was a family man. He didn't separate his business from his family, however. He saw his business as an extension of his family and his family as an extension of his business, in a sense. He worked side by side with his brother Sam. His wife Mickey worked in the business for many years, as did Sam's wife Mary. All three of his sons and his son-in-law worked in the business. Bob Naito, Ann Naito Campbell, and Larry Naito are still working for Norcrest China. And Bill, in fact, pulled my father, Per Sjogren, who's seated at this table, out of retirement to run Montgomery Park. At family gatherings, the topic of conversation was usually business, and I quickly learned that I wasn't about to change that, so I better learn more about the business and the people working in it if I was to participate. He did like family dinners, and he liked to cook the turkey, and one of my first experiences with the family was when Steve and I came up from law school in one year in the fall. Bill and Mickey's house is surrounded by these huge oak trees, which just put tons and tons of leaves out every fall. And That weekend, Bill was not particularly sympathetic to my claims and Steve's claims that we had to study that weekend, and he was determined that we would help him rake leaves. He promised us a nice turkey dinner, though, if we would help him rake leaves. So we went out about noon, and we worked all afternoon. We couldn't really quit before he did. And about 6 o'clock, we go in, anticipating this lovely dinner, only to find that he had forgotten the first rule of cooking, which is to turn on the oven. That stuffed bird that he had labored over earlier in the day had been sitting in this cold oven for 5 hours. We teased him about that for years afterwards. In fact, my kids would usually call him on Thanksgiving to remind him to turn on the oven. Another major influence that Bill has had on me was his positive attitude. He took great pleasure in very simple things. He enjoyed the arts and symphony, but he loved movies, especially Westerns, and Oaks Park was one of his favorite places in the city. As a family, we would often spend time together at Salishan, and one of his favorite pastimes there was a sport that he invented, a sport that he passed on to his children and now to his grandchildren. Will Naito's here today, who can attest to this. This sport my son named golf feeling, and I will do my best to describe it to you since I have done it several times. One of the holes on this beautifully manicured golf course at Salishan directly is bordered by the Siletz Bay. And whether it's because of the wind or the ineptitude of the golfers that golf at Salishan, I don't know, but approximately at this one particular tee-off point, approximately 10% of the shots go directly up and then plop right into the bay. If the tide is low, they go right into the mud, and if the tide is in, they plop right into the water. All fall, winter, and spring, these golf balls go up, and then they plop into the bay. Bill would watch this, and he'd wait till the weather was just right, and the tide was low, and then he would announce that we would all go golf feeling. We'd walk down to the bay, take off our shoes and socks. Bill would wear his old khaki shorts. He'd take off his shirt and have a half-chewed cigar in his mouth. We would gingerly climb down these rocks and step into this oozing mud that came up to your knees. And as you would slowly walk through this muck with mud squishing between your toes, there would be this moment of glee, of utter delight, when you would feel the smooth yet somewhat rough surface of a golf ball in your toes. And then you'd scoop down into the mud, into this slimy muck with your hands, scoop up the ball, and plop it into your bucket. People would occasionally drive by in their nice white golf carts, wearing their clean white golfing outfits, having paid $100 to go golf at Salishan, and wonder what in the heck Bill Naito was doing, what this millionaire was doing out in the middle of the Siletz Bay. But he would return to the golf house just caked, back to the beach house just caked with mud, triumphant in the knowledge that he had just harvested hundreds of their golf balls. Besides family and fun, Bill did care deeply about politics, and that was an interest that we shared. Maybe it was because of his experiences as an American in World War II. Yes, an American of Japanese ancestry. But whatever the reason, he knew how vitally important it was that we elect good people to public office. Of course, he believed, as I do, that with a few exceptions, these good people are usually Democrats. He also believed that if 2 or even more good people were running, you might as well support both or all of the candidates involved. We often discussed politics, and I would talk to him about what was happening at the state level, and he would talk to me about what was happening locally. He encouraged me to run for Metro, and we were talking about this about a week before he died. He told me how much he really loved the city of Portland and how he had always wanted to be mayor. And in some sense, I was really shocked because I thought of all he had given to this city, to the libraries, the trees, the parks, all of these redevelopment projects that he had done, Albers Mill, Montgomery Park, McCormick Pier, the Galleria, all of these projects that he had done. And most of them were complete gambles when he did them. And I thought of the constraints that are on elected officials. you can't gamble like that. You have to have a lot of public support, and you have to have the votes, and you have to make decisions based on what task force come up with. And Bill didn't have to do that. He could gamble. He could pursue his vision when nobody was along with him. And I told him that I thought he had done more for this city than he ever could have done as mayor. And I think he knew in his heart that that was right, that I was right. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, City Club and Naito family. I structured my comments pretty formally in written type pages, and I heard it's supposed to keep it to 5 minutes, so more than half of it's gone. But many of us have been touched by the result of Bill Naito's vision, the projects and causes in which he was directly involved, all improve the face and character of the city. Many of us felt the positive impact from his activities, but didn't really know him. Many of us just knew about him. And that was my case. My personal perspective of Bill developed as I worked with him on 2 different projects. These projects were probably typical challenges for Bill. Others with less vision and with less courage might not have started. To me, the completion of these projects demonstrated his indomitable spirit. The Japanese word for this spirit is gambari. Another word for this spirit could be guts. One project was the Albers Mill building on Northwest Front Avenue. During a period in 1987-1988, while I was working for the Oregon Wheat Commission, Senator Hatfield requested a proposal from the commission to create a wheat marketing center in Portland, thus reactivating a long-time goal of the commission. The Albers Mill building, owned by the Naito family, was one of 6 sites considered and evaluated. At that time, it was a shell, dark and dank and smelly, a remnant of the past, inhabited by river rats and pigeons, and full of hanging cobwebs. The project was a unique combining of private and federal financing, and therefore very complex to negotiate contracts. When negotiations stalled, Bill would work through the maze of details and settle the differences because of his strong conviction to get the job done. Now it is a structure that has a remodeled version of the old building, a National Historical Landmark, and with a new addition that replaced the original warehouse and riverside dock areas. Within 2 years, this visionary orchestrated 6 floors of office space in the remodeled area and 119,000 square feet of rentable space overall. Presently, that building is fully occupied by 29 separate business entities with a 2 to 3 year waiting list. The other project was the Japanese American Historical Plaza on Northwest Front Avenue. In February of 1979, there was a program at the Exposition Center to memorialize the issuance of, in 1942, of Executive Order 9066 by President Roosevelt, ordering the evacuation and internment of persons of Japanese ancestry on the western United States. Robert Murase, the landscape architect for the Historical Plaza, was inspired to dream that someday there should be a way to honor the hard work and struggles of the Japanese pioneers who emigrated from Japan to Oregon beginning in the 1890s, only to have their accomplishments wiped out by Executive Order 9066. Bob discussed the concept with Bill, and the idea kind of brewed in Bill's mind until the spring of 1988. At that time, the city of Portland decided to complete the Tom McCall Waterfront Park by improving the north end between the Burnside and Steel bridges. The city asked for proposals from the community. Bill's mind perked up. He talked with Bob, and under the sponsorship of the Japanese American Citizens League, a proposal for Bob's inspired project was submitted. Bill saw the location as a perfect place for a memorial to the Japanese experience in Oregon. It bordered the area known as Japantown, where many Japanese had businesses and had lived until their internment in 1942. He saw the memorial as a collage of Japanese experiences. He saw the project as a permanent reminder of the importance of the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And he saw the depiction of the history of the Japanese in Oregon as a learning experience for students. The history as depicted begins with a recitation of the Bill of Rights and culminates with a presentation of excerpts from the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. With that act, the Congress of the United States apologized for the unlawful internment during World War II. Well, there was an empty parcel of park property, just grass and weeds. It was the summer of 1988, and Bob Marasse's concept plan was accepted by the city, so it was time to get busy. Bill said he would help to raise funds for the project, so as president of the Oregon Nikkei Endowment, I appointed him chair of the fundraising committee, a real smart move. The historical plaza was dedicated in August of 1990. The vision for the historical plaza came true. It has attracted visitors from throughout the United States and from foreign lands. It has been visited by students from local districts and by students from Japan. And not too long ago, the Japanese ambassador to the United States visited the plaza. In addition to his indomitable spirit, Bill had the endless energy to spread his attention over many things in which he was interested. Not only the concerns of his company, but also things of interest to him that were for the good of the community. Bill didn't do things just for personal recognition. He wanted people to recognize the worth of the project for the community, and he would convince you to want that project too. So one of the legacies that Bill left for us is his community spirit. He'd want us to reach out and work together to make it better for all. Thanks.
In the time that's left, before we open to questions, I thought I would ask the panel, Henry has really started us down this path, to share with us their views or observations about what Portland can be like if there's a little bit of Bill in each of us and we were to act on that spirit. So perhaps, Jackie, if you would like to begin.
Be happy to. Certainly.
Are you on?
Yeah.
I think we'll just stay here. Yes, thanks.
Certainly, if we have more of us that have Bill in us, we're going to hold that sense of community and be thinking about what is good for the long-term vision of what we want to produce and where we're going. I also think that that means that we will be persistent about our dreams. I think that was one of the great qualities that Bill had, that he was persistent about pursuing what he saw as a way for us to go in the future. Just because we all said no or we all didn't pay much attention didn't mean an idea died. It meant that we just had to work at explaining it a little better and maybe a little more often. And I think that persistence is a quality that would be wonderful and would make a great difference in what we're doing. And I also think that the sense of community, the sense of belonging together, the sense of connectedness, the sense of caring about what happens to each other is something that we would see more in our community if we had more of Bill in us.
Well, as a graduate student at the University of Chicago, the one-time academic home of Milton Friedman and other Nobel Prize winners of the famed Chicago School, Bill Naito was fully aware of the marvels of the market and what it could do. Moreover, he was a tough competitor in the marketplace himself. But it has to be said that he was also aware of the limits of the market system, among them the failure to provide public amenities and public places and spaces and the spirit nourishing such things. He believed in and exemplified public spiritedness, responsible citizenship, and more pretentiously, the spirit of Republican virtue. It takes a lot of leadership and love and cooperation among citizens and the private and public sectors to make a city more than a geographical location or a municipal corporation, to make it a congenial place to work, live, and enjoy life. Bill had that love, as we all know. He exercised leadership, as we know, and he helped cement the cooperation to build, sustain, and improve the Portland we know and are becoming, the living, hence ever-changing city before us. I spoke of his leadership and hands-on role with respect to the renovation and restoration of Central Library, part of his lifelong passion for public libraries. Before his death, he was committed to creating a Chinese classical garden in Old Town. Well, there are so many things that he's been involved with, large and small, and I'm sure they can't all be cataloged and put down in one place. And a lot of different people have different memories, and probably no one knows the totality of it all. But the point is, what does it all add up to? Well, if we were all infused with the spirit of Bill Naito, we would be spending more time thinking about and planning things which make life and the city worthwhile: parks, libraries, education, transportation, theater, the arts, architecture, trees, you name it. All the things which make up the public space are common resources. And if Bill's spirit were strong enough in more of us, we'd find the way to invest more money in the things which count for everyone. Now, I think Bill's spirit has a greater significance than that I've just described. At this juncture in American society, at this time in the life of our city and state, Bill's spirit, if planted in the hearts of more of us, could have a decisive effect. We have heard, many of us from Bill himself, that the thing which meant most to him in his community life was his contribution to making a reality of the Japanese Historical Plaza in Tom McCall Waterfront Park. The park testifies to injustice, discrimination, and the harsh experiences of particular people in the not-too-distant past. It's an explicit story of a breach of American values, particularly the Bill of Rights, and a reminder of what those values are and what we as a society should be. So the park is a reproof. It's a reminder of a terrible human experience. At the same time, it represents a tribute to the basic values of American society, particularly the Bill of Rights, and calls upon us to live up to our highest values and aspiration. Many will recall, too, Bill's delight in the publication of Touching the Stones, the history of Japanese Americans in Oregon, and his pleasure in giving the book quite widely to friends and associates. Here is a story. Here is a history which should be known. It's the particular story of particular people, and it is a story for that particular people, but it is something more than that, which is one reason why Bill was giving the book widely. It's part of our common story and should be known by everyone. The particular community is not prized off from, but is part of our society. Pride in the particular is not as an assault on others of different backgrounds or an attack on the fundamental values of the society as a whole. In fact, it's an affirmation of them. Some years ago, in a small gathering at Reed College of town and gown assembled, Bill spoke in a low-key, straightforward way of the experiences he and his family had during World War II. He told us that Reed was the first place he felt accepted. He spoke of a shyness so great when he came to the campus that he could not speak out in class, and of faculty members who successfully encouraged him to speak out in discussion. Through the years, I heard other things from Bill as small parts of longer conversations, little snippets inserted in long conversations. Some for instances. He described restrictive housing covenants based on race during his youth. He spoke of the discomfort he and other non-whites experienced in riding trolleys and buses when he was growing up in our city, and how uncomfortable non-whites felt when they were in certain parts of our city. He came up to me at a reception for the then Japanese American ambassador to the United States with local business leaders clustered around, eager to press the flesh of the visiting diplomat, and said quietly to me, "What a difference a few years make." He mentioned the laws barring marriages between members of different races in effect at the time he himself was married. He told me of a meeting not long ago at the Oregon at which the editors solicited criticism of press coverage of minorities. Bill took that occasion to remind them of the failure of the editors and owners of earlier years to defend the Constitution and Bill of Rights when the City Council had passed legislation closing Japanese American business enterprises. So it's the case, as a little imagination and our common sense would tell us it would and should be, that Bill was affected by his experiences, that he did not forget them, and at some level he was terribly hurt. He knew, and we must know as well, that past injustices and discrimination cannot be undone, and amends cannot be fully made for them. They are part of the history of an imperfect society peopled by fallible human beings. To stop here, however, is to miss the most important points. First, Bill never presented himself as the victim or the oppressed, nor did he try to lay guilt for past injustices or discrimination on the men and women he met in his daily life. He did not perpetuate or repeat a cycle of distrust, suspicion, or hate, but treated others as he would wish to be treated himself. More important still, perhaps, Bill had faith in American values embodied in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and particularly its Bill of Rights, and an optimism with respect to the processes of American democracies. He believed, I think, that to the extent we fall short of realizing the values underlying the American society, the values nevertheless remain powerful as aspirations to pursue and serve as standing reproof and rebuke to us for our failures and shortcomings. I think Bill would have responded positively to the words of the Princeton historian Bernard Lewis. Imperialism, sexism, and racism are words of Western coinage, not because the West invented these evils, which are, alas, universal, but because the West recognized and named and condemned them as evils and struggled mightily, and not entirely in vain, to weaken their hold and to help their victims. If, to borrow a phrase, Western culture does indeed go, imperialism, sexism, and racism will not go with it. More likely casualties will be the freedom to denounce them and the effort to end them. Aware that past injustice and discrimination cannot be undone and that change is sometimes slow and incomplete, Bill was optimistic that the combination of values and processes present here more than elsewhere in the world enabled criticism and ultimately change. Bill's spirit was great and generous, never more so than in the matters I've just discussed. If we were immersed in that spirit, the foundation would be laid to address the most serious problems of this or any city, and indeed of the United States today.
Thank you, Paul. We have a couple more minutes to hear from the other panelists before we take questions. Lisa?
Thank you. I've identified three ways that we might be able to make a difference and honor Bill. The first is to maintain and fight for a strong public education system. Bill came from a simple background in Southeast Portland, and like many children of immigrants, he could not speak English before he started public school. He graduated from Washington High School, so he is a product of our public education system, and I think that's where he got his first start. Number two, we can stand up collectively and individually for human rights and dignity. Bill actively opposed the OCA ballot measures 9 and 13, and he would have been glad that this time the Supreme Court did the right thing and threw out the Colorado law that targeted gays and lesbians. He would also ask us to stand together against these acts of terrorism nationally that are burning black churches. And our community has also been stunned by the cross burning directed at Billy Ballard and now the fire at Emmanuel Christian Fellowship. It is just unbelievably painful that this is happening today in our nation and our state and our city. The final thing is a more specific one, in that I was having lunch with Metro Councilor Ed Washington, and he was briefing me on the facilities run and operated by Metro, and he said they really don't know what to do with the Civic Stadium. Apparently, it needs about $20 million worth of earthquake changes to make it earthquake-proof, and I thought, I wish Bill were here, because I know he would have a great idea of what to do with this really beautiful piece of property that's right in downtown Portland, directly on public transit lines. So I would encourage any of you or anyone that's listening, if you have any great ideas, call Ed Washington, Metro Councilor. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Henry, did you have any concluding remarks?
Yes, one of the many things that Bill taught me was to seize an opportunity, so just a moment. I thank Paul Bragdon for mentioning Touching the Stones, the beautiful publication that Bill really worked hard to get out. And one of his unfinished projects is to find sponsors to get this into the educational system, because as he said, and it's been said many times before, that the history of the evacuation and internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II is mentioned very little in the history of the United States. So if you'd like to help Bill's movement, give me a call. We'll work a deal. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg Jackson now has the first question to the panel.
I'd like to thank the panelists for such short notice in coming together today and sharing Bill's vision with us. And I'd also like to thank the Naito family for their assistance in pulling this together. Unfortunately, life is not always fair. Sometimes injustice does occur. For some people, though, in that moment, the choice can simply be to give up. As we've heard today, that was not the case with the spirit of Bill Naito. What I would like to ask the panelists today is, what do you believe can the spirit of Bill Naito continue to teach us about taking positive action in the face of adversity?
Who would like to respond? Or?
I think the first thing it can teach us is that each and every individual can and does make a difference. And that, just because the task seems to be daunting and overwhelming does not mean that it has to be. And that what each of us can do is speak up, state our ideas, speak our truth, be willing to go against what others are thinking, and deal with the truth and the human connectedness and the community and the long-term welfare of all of us, and just simply be willing to be out there and change the way the world is working because one person is willing to speak.
Anyone else? If not, we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. Would anyone like to pose one to our members of our panel? You want to come to the microphone, please, here in the middle of the room?
Not really a question so much as, do we know...
If you would let us know who you are first, and then we'll go from there.
I'm Bob Davis, a City Club member.
Thanks, Bob.
The question is, do you know of a book that is underway about Bill Naito's life? Is something being done to perpetuate this, except for all the many, many things that have already been done? But is there anyone heard anything about this?
No.
Well, I think we should start that idea. I think it would be a great way to perpetuate his memory in lots of different ways. So,
thank you.
Well, I'll just quickly
Sure.
say I've been meaning to call Chet Orloff with the Historical Society, because really, as you travel around Portland and talk to people, everybody, in the short time that they may have, in whatever connection they had with Bill, has a great Bill Naito anecdote to share. And I've been thinking that it would be a very good project to pull all these stories together from everybody in the community and have them located somewhere. And that's something I'd like to see happen.
Ray?
I'm Ray Polani, a member of the City Club. Bill and I shared an appreciation for rails and public transport. And I have a question for the panel and really for everybody. Will we save the transit mall and transit the way Bill wanted?
Who would like to begin with that question? Lisa?
Well, I'm with you there, but I think some of those decisions are probably best discussed with the City Council.
Jackie or Paul, did you want to comment?
I can only answer also, I hope so. I think we've got to do that, being good citizens and speaking out and standing up and being firm, you know, that we've been talking about all through this presentation. I think it's going to take a lot of voices to make that happen. We need to do that.
Yes.
Erwin Mandel, a new City Club member. In reference to the City Council, may I make a suggestion? Since the City Hall is being renovated, someone mentioned to me the other night, perhaps as a suitable memorial, to rename the council chamber after Bill and put a very large photograph of him up on the ceiling looking down so that future city councils are reminded of what they should do.
We have time for one more question if anyone has one or a comment. Well, I want to thank the panel very much for providing us with inspiration, great memories, including a lot of humor, which was all such an important part of Bill. Thanks again for the Naito family joining us today, and appreciate your contribution to this special Friday surprise. I'll turn the program back to Francis.
Thank you very much, Don, and thanks to all of the members of the panel today. Those remembrances and understandings, things that we need to focus on, were greatly valued. I think if all of us can take the spirit that we've heard about today and know of and incorporate it into our own lives in this community, that the community will indeed benefit. Certainly the tail light on Bill that I enjoyed so much as part of his humor is not dim. It's not gone. It's clear to me from being here today that he continues to lead this community and will continue to lead this community. I don't know whether we can handle him on the ceiling of the council chambers, but his presence is very much here and always will be. And I thank you all for coming, the Naito family, all of you, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Very nice. Thanks very much. Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you. Good. Good.
Paul, thank you very much. Not at all. It worked out just fine. I wasn't sure how much more you had behind you. But I heard
There you go.
your remarks also on the water question.
Well, you've been waiting for this opportunity. Well, no problem. I mean, obviously, it was terrific.